Hello and welcome back to Simple Times Studios, where I recall my adventures in solo RPGs for your entertainment. Today we have the finale of the adventure started with Robert Manus in the Endless Mall. Everything since then has led up to this. Moving on to the setting truths that will define our adventure. Once again, we are in the Gliding Rim Galaxy, part of the Grimmerspace setting, a sci-fi science fiction horror setting originally created for Starfinder by Iron GM Games. Specifically, we're going to a new homebrew location, an abandoned stellar construct out in space. Why was it abandoned? Will that negatively impact our heroes in some way? Will our heroes be able to find what they originally came here for and find a way home to their own galaxy? Or will they get hopelessly lost in how mind-bogglingly big the construct is? Tune in and find out. This is also going to be a mega crawl with massive biomes and continent-wide urban locations. This will alternate between a hex crawl and a dungeon crawl as appropriate, if necessary. The crew of the Cerberus is back together and on their own ship. Everyone is level 4 from their adventures getting back together. We have Robert Manus is still the tough commando. Sam is the tough explorer. Jerry Riggs is a level 4 oxjock now. And Blossom is a level 4 smart creator. The rules and rubrics that'll be helping us define this adventure. Our primary rule set will be the Intergalactic Heroes beta rules by Evil Genius Games. The Solo Game Master's Guide by Geek Gamers will be used for oracles and other supplementary rules. Everyday Heroes will be used when necessary to supplement the Intergalactic Hero beta rules. All characters will be level 4. Their equipment is largely unchanged, though Robert has traded his weapons for a pair of blaster rifle and pistol to match everyone else's stats. Adventure begin. Stellar Prison. There was a brief silence after Samantha Autumns was transported to the bridge of the Cerberus, the suited woman taking the moment to turn off her helmet's recorder and take off her helmet. As the crisp, clean air of the ship's atmospheric regulators touched her face, she shuddered. "Oh, please tell me this is real." "Well, Corporal, I thought it was real when I woke up this morning," Robert Manus replied with a slight smile as the several strangers watched the exchange between the two humans. "What about you? Is this really you, or is this some evil doppelganger gag?" he asked, his expression growing serious. Autumns looked back, her own expression one of bemused annoyance. "Really? That's the first thing you—" "Sam! You're back!" Blossom squealed, the mountainous Orion panda scooping up the shorter human in a tight hug and nuzzling the top of Samantha's head with her chin. Samantha Autumns tried to remain stoic in front of everyone on the bridge despite the display, but ultimately caved and nuzzled Blossom back. Robert shook his head and laughed. "All right, I'm convinced. It's definitely you. So, Corporal, where have you been since the Thunder Mages chased us off our own ship?" the tough Federation commando asked as Blossom set Samantha back down. "The space wizard, and I can't believe I'm using that term, that sent us all over this galaxy, teleported me to a planet called Paravesh," Samantha began, and was quick to notice the strangers seemed to perk up at the mention of the name of that planet. "There, I dodged the local screen and parlayed with the Locha, who apparently liked what I offered so much that they agreed to it before I even said it out loud. Wasn't even on the planet for more than 2 days, but that was more than enough." Robert nodded. "So, based on the star map that our new friends lent us, you were teleported over a dozen light years and at least a week into the future." "Wait, what?" Samantha replied. "It's been a little over a week since we were forced to abandon ship and got scattered. Since then, I made contact with an arm of the local interplanetary law enforcement agency. Blossom and I recovered the Cerberus. We recovered Jerry with the help of our new friends, and we're currently repaying the handful of favors we owe them for all of this," Robert explained, gesturing to the other strangers gathered on the ship's bridge. Finally, the leader of that group, a man in a dark duster and a wide-brimmed hat, stepped forward. Lieutenant Detective Abraham Shields, ARC cop attached to Intercrux, Truthseekers Division. This is my team, Detective Shields introduced, taking off his hat and politely nodding to Samantha before gesturing to the other strangers. Corporal Samantha Autumns, of the Soul Federation Trailblazer Corps, Planetary Survey Specialist of the Cerberus, she replied professionally, nodding back at the native lawman. Shields turned and introduced the rest of his team. Corporal Ayla Fireblossom, a Voti Marine that was formerly attached to the Voti Marines Corps Xeno Encounter Recon Unit. He gestured to a short, stout, red-headed woman with heavy armor and the muscular build of a heavy gravity worlder. A small chain gun was perched on her shoulder, but Samantha a trigger mechanism for it. And then we have Ark and Ariana Hickspark, my two tech specialists. Shields then gestured to two people standing next to Ayla, a grumpy humanoid male in a patched-together jumpsuit loaded down with tools, and a green-skinned humanoid female in a sleek eggshell white jumpsuit with an ornate spiderweb pattern, and a small floating android with a boxy humanoid appearance. Samantha had a lot of questions. It looks like her three cohorts had been busy while she was trapped on the forest planet. They were definitely going to have a lot of stories to share later, but one stuck in her mind. So what do you mean by owing the Truthseekers some debt, sir? Robert shrugged. Well, there was a bit of a kerfluffle with a local salvage company trying to illegally claim the Cerberus, even though Shields told them no. We reclaimed the ship, but Shields had to help navigate the legalese. Fortunately, the company that bought the Cerberus off the salvagers was very understanding, especially after I used the ship to kill a couple dozen Ignatius that were squatting in their scrapyard and using their robots for target practice. Jerry was fished out of a very bad spot with some local pirates and their toys by a patrolling Votikun warship that was captained by someone that happened to be a friend of Shields. So we owe Shields and the Truthseekers more than just one favor. Autumns looked at Robert Manus, then back at Shields. So what are we doing to settle these debts, sir? Shields cleared his throat, and to Samantha's surprise, so did the oversized gun magnetically attached to his duster. A Votikun cruiser disappeared in this area searching for some missing VIPs from both the Votikun Empire and the Thriftic Binary. They were originally meeting to broker a trade agreement between the two polities. No one has been able to identify the kidnappers or have received any ransom demands. Tracking the kidnappers down to their last known position, the cruiser sent a message that they found something unbelievable. And? Robert asked. Apparently this was something he was just finding out as well. What else did they say? Was that where the kidnappers were hidden or not? Don't know. It's been 2 weeks since that last message, and they missed check-in twice, Shields replied. So, the favor for paying off all the favors we owe you is to go after a missing ship that went after an unknown number of terrorists that also disappeared, Robert asked, the crew of the Cerberus all looking at their Intercrux contact. You do know we're an exploration vessel, right? And not a particularly well-armed one, either. Yes, but you're also the only ship in the immediate area, so we want your help to assess what actually happened and send a report back to the Votikun Empire on what we find. Robert exhaled. A simple survey mission, in and out. We've heard that one before, he replied, saying what the rest of the ship's crew was silently thinking. Still, we don't have any better plan for getting home beyond gunning it for that big purple rift above the galactic plane and hoping for the best. So maybe we'll get lucky and there's something there that can give us better odds. If not, at least we'll have a story to tell. Abraham nodded, his expression making it clear he knew full well what a difficult sell this was for the crew of the Cerberus. Regardless, it would still take a couple of days for us to arrive at the cruiser's last known location. Plenty of time to get your friend caught up on what you've been doing and for us to talk about the gliding rim. Shields replied. It would take the Cerberus 2 days to arrive at their destination. In the meantime, Samantha ran all the tests she could on the plant samples she took from Paravesh, and the crew spent as much time as they could talking with their new friends and each other to learn what they could about the gliding rim galaxy. Samantha Autumns is going to use the laboratory module to run some tests and analyze the Locha tree samples she collected. This will probably be a DC-15 challenging test, as it will definitely test the limits of the equipment she has available to her. But she's going to make a 1d20 plus 3 natural science skill check with advantage. 8 on the highest die. Well, she learned something at least. As there was only so much that could be done to analyze a reality-bending tree with general-purpose research equipment, what Samantha managed to observe from her tests only reinforced her previous observations. Testing the wood samples for electrical conductivity and scanning them beneath a positron microscope revealed a similar, if obviously more plant-like structure to the human brain. The bark sample was still thorny and had a trace DNA sample she couldn't identify without more powerful equipment, though if she had to take a guess, it was probably from a local humanoid that was impaled on the thorns by a screen hunting party. Still, she preserved the remaining samples in cryostasis so someone else could analyze it later and follow up on her initial findings. The rest of the time spent in transit was passed talking. Samantha shared her accounts and sensor recordings of Paravesh while Robert and Blossom talked about their exploration of the Thriftic binary. Jerry remained silent about his experiences with the Corsarium before he escaped on a stolen fighter. There was a look in his eyes that told the others it was better to not ask for too many details. Everyone seemed to be interested in Sam's short time on Paravesh. She quickly learned that few locals had gone to the planet and survived the experience to talk about it, so there wasn't much information on it. Samantha, on the other hand, was intrigued by the descriptions of the sprawling megacities of the Adian Combine and the ridiculousness of the endless mall of the Thriftic binary. The fact that Robert and the Vazarian robotics specialist, Ariana, both seemed to have contrasting views on the endless mall was also a bit telling. Soon they arrived at the edge of the system. As the ship transitioned back into normal space, the crew of the Cerberus was on the bridge and quickly realized something was amiss. Everyone was at their places on the bridge and ran the usual sensor sweep upon arrival at a new system. Thermal, electromagnetic, radar, and so on. The only thing more unexpected than what they didn't find was what they did find. The 4 Grimmers arrived on the bridge a few minutes later. Robert was the first to look up from a console as Abraham walked over to ask what they had found. Well, I have to say, I expected a lot of things, given how unpleasant this galaxy has been, but I didn't expect this, Robert replied as he projected the results of the sensor survey onto a nearby display for the Cerberus' guests. An image of a massive metallic spear appeared on the screen, surface smooth except for several orifices that looked large enough to fly a ship through, and the erosion of micrometeorites. We did not find either the ships you were looking for or this system's star, but we definitely found what left the Votikun ship awestruck. Which is? Shields asked. A Dyson sphere, a massive artificial sphere built around a local star. We're talking continents with more habitable land than entire planets. Have to say I didn't expect to see one of these here. You build big, but you don't build that big, Robert replied. The 4 Grimmers looked at the display. The sphere is hollow? Isla Fireblossom, the Votimarine asked. Yes, and it looks like there are several ways to get in, Jerry Riggs interjected from the helm as he adjusted their course and brought them in closer. At the press of a few more buttons, he ran another scan and read off the report. The sphere is hollow. There aren't any anomalous readings, suggesting this might be a trap. There are a couple of points where a ship larger than a battleship can fly through. About 5 in total. Any friends that would like to meet us? Blossom asked from the engineering station. No, No activity on the communication channels. Lots of electrical activity, so there must be something working, Samantha replied as she looked up from her console and the Cerberus came closer to the sphere. In the hour it took them to scan, read off the results, and submit a copy of their readings to a Truthseeker relay, they arrived in orbit around the Dyson sphere and flew in through the nearest metal pipe leading inside the sphere's metallic surface. When they came out the other side, it was a sight unlike most of them had ever seen before. The light of a yellow-red star shone brightly in front of them. Surrounding them was the inside of the sphere. Massive continents and unfathomably vast oceans covered the inside of the sphere in every possible direction. More of these massive pipes connecting the inside to the outside of the sphere, breaking up this otherwise stunning, almost natural-looking display. There were over 4 dozen continents, each the size of a large planet. All had some kind of urban development, while at least 2 seemed to be completely given over to urbanization. Every continent had a towering space elevator rising up from the continent's equatorial region. Another hour or so of scanning, and they found the rest of the information they sought. There was an atmosphere, and it was breathable. Both missing ships were moored to the space elevator leading down to one of the completely urbanized continents, and there was no sign of active civilization in sensor range. "No one is showing up on sensors?" Robert asked. Samantha shook her head. The Sol Federation soldier shook his head and looked at their guests, particularly at Ayla. The Raider looks to be about the same size as the Cerberus, so it probably has life support for a couple dozen people. And would I be right if I guesstimate that the Votikun cruiser holds about 1,000 crew, including Marines? He asked. Isla nodded in agreement as Abraham rubbed his chin in contemplation. Over 1,000 people disappearing into nowhere. Robert Tur asked Samantha, "Any chance we're getting some kind of interference? The continent looks pretty well covered with cities." "Okay, are we getting some kind of interference from the continent below?" I give it a 50-50, and the Oracle says 55, no. Samantha checked her console again and shook her head. There wasn't anything that could generate interference strong enough to fool their sensors. Not on the continent below. "And already I don't like the look of this," Robert said. "Let's go back out, head to the nearest friendly port, and see if your friends can give you some more support. 8 people is nowhere nearly enough to search this," Robert replied, gesturing to the massive, inverted artificial planet that filled up their view screens in every direction. "Does something prevent them from leaving? I give it a somewhat likely, and 30 says yes, something does. Is it related to the Dyson sphere? I give it a 50-50 and end up with a 32. Yes, it is." As the Cerberus started to maneuver back the way they came, the sensor console blinked with the reading of an energy spike in the access tunnel. Samantha saw it and immediately focused the ship's external cameras at the tunnel before the ship even finished turning. Bluish and green energy barriers and a metallic iris were closing the tunnel behind them. By the time they finished coming around and flying towards the tunnel at speed, their exit would be sealed shut. Robert gave Abraham and the other Truthseekers a look before looking back at the display. "Should have seen that coming," he sighed. "Sam, are sensors detecting similar energy spikes from anywhere else in the sphere?" "Yeah, 5 points total. All along the equator of the sphere. Same energy signature. Each one an exit to the outside." "Why am I not surprised? Either we walked into a trap or the sphere has a faulty airlock system that needs to be rebooted." Robert shook his head. "Blossom, you have engineering sensors. Anything around our entryway that looks like a control center?" The Orion Panda looked at her console. "Yes, there is some kind of complex right next to the tunnel. However, the nearest landing area is that space elevator," she replied, highlighting the one where the missing Grimmer ships were moored. Robert grumbled as he calculated the distance from the base of the space elevator to the control unit for the airlock. at least 1,000 miles in one direction, and most of it through a massive arcology that spanned most of the continent. Looks like we're not getting out of looking for your missing friends and figuring out who your mystery terrorists are, he stated, looking at Abraham and the other Grimmers before nodding to Jerry at the helm. Let's dock at that space elevator and get started. Jerry nodded and set a course. A few minutes later, he was preparing to dock with the space elevator. Jerry Riggs is going to make a computer's check since the space elevator's automated systems are a foreign system. 1d20 plus 4, 17. Well, it is a civilian station, so that should be more than enough to get the automated systems to take over without damaging the ship. Does he learn anything about the builders of the sphere in the process? I give it a 50-50 and 42. Yes, and deep thoughts answer to everything, no less. Are the builders a species that would be familiar to the crew of the Cerberus? Again, 50-50 and 45. There's only one species they know that could build such a thing. Easing the ship to a near stop at an empty berth, Jerry started the request for landing by entering a polymorphic code designed to talk to the alien computer in a variety of programming languages, and then report back the one that fit the system. When the results came back, the Orion mouse was halfway through the motions of entering standard docking procedures before realizing just how effortlessly both he and the computer recognized the space elevator's programming language. No, it can't be. Jerry mumbled and ran the initial query code again, only to get the same coding language right back at him. It could still be a coincidence, but still, the odds were very, very unlikely. What is it, Riggs? Is the space elevator rejecting your landing request? Robert called from his station. No, Mr. Manus. The opposite, actually. The space elevator is running off an old Forerunner programming language. The Forerunners are Forerunners. We're here in the gliding rim. I should have us docked in a few more minutes. Robert and the other explorers from the Milky Way galaxy all looked at each other, the Grimmers looking at them with a mixture of confusion and expectation. Who are the Forerunners, Ark? The grumpy dark-haired salvager from Jylor asked finally. The Forerunners were an ancient species from our galaxy that disappeared at least 3 centuries ago, as far as anyone knows. No one knows why, but they left all their toys and artifacts behind. They created the member species of the Orion Commonwealth, people like Jerry and Blossom, out of fusions of human DNA and the DNA of various mammalian species they encountered throughout our galaxy. Building something this big in an entirely different galaxy and unknown distance from our home galaxy is definitely something they could do. If it is theirs, then I have some good news and bad news for you. What's the bad news? Abraham's Peace Murphy chirped. The bad news is that there is only 1,000 different things that could have happened to your missing people that we know of, and 1,000 times as many things that could have happened that we never documented before. The Forerunners were very much a because we can civilization. All sorts of weird stuff could be crammed in here, Robert answered. All right, what's the good news? Isla replied. We know why the sphere was probably abandoned. The Forerunners here probably disappeared in the same event that made them disappear in our own galaxy, Jerry replied as he finished docking the ship and docking clamps latched on with a reverberating clang. That's not exactly comforting since you don't know why they disappeared, Abraham replied. Well, it's one less problem we have to worry about, so let's get our gear and start working through all the others, Robert stated as he stood up from his station and went to get his gear out of the ship's armory. Several minutes later, both groups were armed and assembled outside the Cerberus' airlock. Their suits and armor were environmentally sealed and checked one last time before the airlock cycled and the explorers entered the Forerunner space elevator. The space elevator foyer was a circular lobby ringed with bulkheads for ship umbilicals and airlocks. Well-cushioned metamorphic furniture was set up liberally through the brightly colored lobby, usually ringed around an automated vendor with a stationary universal constructor with a pre-programmed menu. Banners and monitors displayed announcements in Forerunner script. It was all strangely eerie. Only the overgrown potted plants gave any sense of how long the station had been abandoned. Everything else looked like the original owners had gone and vanished mere days ago. Spreading out to watch for hidden threats or to access the technology in the room, the explorers looked at the umbilicals connecting the Votikun cruiser and the mysterious frigate before turning to the elevator dock to check to see if any cars were available. Are there any elevator cars available, or will they have to call one and wait for it to come all the way up? I give it a 50-50 because I have no idea, and 26. Yes, there is a car ready to take them down to the planet's surface. Checking the passenger cars ready to go down to the surface, they found one. Robert looked at Abraham Shields and smiled. What do you say if we can find any clues up here before we head down to the surface? Shields nodded and motioned towards the airlock leading towards the kidnapped ship. Is the airlock locked by the ship's security system? I think it's very likely, so 75 or less, and 51, as it should be. Carefully gathered around the airlock, the explorers waited while Blossom tried to hack the computer security. Blossom attempts a computer's check to hack the airlock door without triggering any security systems. On the other end, so 1d20 plus 7 for 17. Yeah, she gets it, barely. Raising her Universal Constructor Gauntlet, Blossom reached for the airlock control panel and wreathed her gauntlet in a halo of light blue energy. Strings of code appeared across her smart goggles before the door opened with a welcoming chime. All four Grimmers gave the Urson techie a bewildered sideways glance as she finished flashing her Commonwealth Wonder Tech. Robert shook his head and carefully stepped through the airlock door into the enemy raider. Boarding the unknown hostile ship, the 8 explorers were prepared for a trap waiting for them, but it never came. Instead, they entered the vessel to be greeted by a luxurious interior. Gilded hallways lined with the glint of gold ran the length of the ship, and door control panels were accented with exotic gems that none of the explorers recognized. But it was the surprisingly simple tapestries that were seemingly everywhere that made the Grimmers pause and spit in recognition. Of all the ships it could have been, it had to be hers. Ark snarled as he gestured at the first tapestry they encountered on the ship. Samantha looked at the fabric hanging he was referring to. Simple black with the embroidered image of a white humanoid skull, its mouth open as if it was screaming, and a pair of regal-looking scepters crossed beneath it. She couldn't really recall seeing a standard like that before, and judging by the looks on their faces, the rest of the Cerberus crew didn't either. So who is she? Samantha asked. Isla grimaced angrily. The Scream Queen, the Sunder Mage known as Nita Ken. We've been dealing with her antics almost since the Sunder Mages arrived. Everyone in our team has had at least one encounter with her, and none of them have been pleasant. Oh, that psycho I met on Paravesh, Samantha replied. I see what you mean about her. She nodded. The identity of the ship's captain discovered, it was time to search the ship for clues and hopefully avoid any potential traps. Are there any further traps or security devices? I give it a somewhat likely, and 8% says yes. Do they find any additional clues? I give it 50-50, and 19 also says yes. For that matter, did they find any supplies? Again, 50-50, and 22 says yes as well. The Oracle must really like me today. Quickly searching the rest of the ship from top to bottom produced very few surprises. Most of the ship was empty. It was as if the Sunder Mage abruptly disappeared along with her crew and prisoners. Equipment and, more importantly, all manner of supplies were left behind. The armory was still stocked with ammunition, and the storerooms adjacent to the galley were still fully provisioned. There didn't seem to be any unpleasant traps left behind at all. until their search took them up to the captain's cabin, where the door was marked by a number of particularly menacing-looking glyphs. Robert Manus didn't see anything particularly unnatural about them, but something about them made the hair on his neck stand on end all the same, and seemed to electrify the very air all around him. Something was definitely amiss here. "All right, she couldn't make this any more obvious if she tried. Anyone have any ideas?" Abraham asked. "How thick is the paint?" Blossom asked as she made some adjustments to her constructor gauntlet and tried to look at the glyphs from over Robert's shoulder. "Not particularly thick, but let's all stand back away from whatever you plan on doing," Robert answered as he took a big step away from the tall Orion panda. The others followed suit. Blossom raised her gauntlet and lowered her goggles before blasting the glyph with a concentrated blast of microwave heat. Blossom is making an arts and crafts roll with her personal gadget to try and disenchant the arcane lettering. 1d20 plus 5 for 11. Is it enough? I think I'll have to ask the Oracle because it can be. 50-50. 50 on the dot says so yes, but barely. At first there was nothing, but then as a particularly large glyph was erased by the burst of microwave energy, the entire door seemed to explode with a spark of electrical energy that briefly dazed anyone directly in front of it, but otherwise didn't cause any serious injury. Inside Nita's personal quarters, the rooms were very much decorated to the personality of its occupant, but otherwise laid out very much as the more militant explorers would have expected. A front multi-purpose living area, a door leading off to a private study, and another door leading off to the bedroom and bathroom. Spread out on a coffee table in the main living room was a holographic map of the sphere section directly below, and several locations marked as being of interest to the Sunder Mage. Is there anything else in here? Are the two prisoners still on the ship? I give it a 50-50 for the first one. 61 says no. I view it as unlikely that the missing prisoners are still on the ship, and 53 says no as well. And that was it. Another quick search revealed nothing else of note. Wherever the mad Sunder Mage kept her two VIP prisoners, it was not on this ship. Curiously, though, one of the marked locations was the control unit Robert Manus and his crewmates were looking for. The Sunder Mage ship searched. The explorers turned to the Votikun warship, hoping it would shed more light on what happened to the crew of either ship. Using the Truthseekers' encrypted access, the locked airlock was open. Are there any further clues what happened to the Votikun crew? I give it a 50-50, and 59 says no. Are there any further supplies? Again, I give it a 50-50, and 73 says no as well. While considerably bigger than the Sunder Mage ship by several size categories, a quick search revealed little that shed further light on what happened to the two crews. The ship's log was found and referenced, but the captain wrote frustratingly little after discovering the sphere. The only thing the explorers managed to glean was that the ship's engines were badly damaged in the fight with the Sunder Mages, and the entire crew had been sent down to search the sphere for the missing VIPs and settle in as they waited for rescue. The ship's equipment and supply stores were completely emptied to outfit the crew being sent down to the surface below. The only things that were left behind were the heavy landers and the tracked APCs. Well, can't tell if this is looking better or worse, Proby, Abraham's Peace Murphy chirped. My credits are in it being worse, Robert Manus interjected without missing a beat, having long gotten used to the idea of a talking cybernetic gun. No one here, no signs below of anyone. If there was a base camp of 1,000 people somewhere around the foundation of this space elevator, we should have picked it up before we docked, so where did everyone go? Everyone else shook their heads, and with the ship searched, there was nothing else to do except finally begin their descent down the space elevator. Boarding the remaining empty car, the 8 explorers sat down in the padded acceleration couches. Blossom then activated a Forerunner control panel and sent their elevator car down to the inverted sphere below. Samantha looked around at the rest of the cabin as they began their ride down. Everyone had settled in and strapped themselves in to keep the elevator car's velocity from pulling them off the couches. All four of the Grimmers were visibly uncomfortable and looked afraid to get up while the elevator car was in motion. The four explorers from outside the galaxy were more accustomed to such technology and eventually acclimated to the point where they could stand up and move around. Yet even at the speed they were going, it would still take several hours down to reach the base of the elevator. And with most of the entertainment options disabled by lack of maintenance or impractical given the speed they were moving at, there was nothing really else to do except talk. Unfortunately, Ariana, the Fazarian robotics engineer, apparently had not picked up on some of the inner turmoil of her new friends. "So what do you think of our galaxy, Sergeant Manus? You've seen the most of it out of your entire crew," the green-skinned humanoid female asked, doing her best to smile as they all felt slightly weightless by being catapulted towards the surface. "Can't say, really. I've only really seen one planet, an urbanized moon, and the inside of a Voti battlecruiser. I've only heard what you've told me about the Adian Combine, the spectrality, and those meld guys that are all cybernetically hooked up to some sort of quantum computer network. And it's still going to be a long report if or when we get back," Robert Manus replied, trying to dodge the question as best as he could, given he knew what her real question was. What did he think of the Thriftic binary? "And what do you think they'll say?" she continued. "Probably that more information will be necessary and maybe send another expedition. Probably a full expeditionary fleet with at least one Leviathan-class ship and several flotillas of exploration ships. Joint sponsor like this one was. Either that or we build a star fortress at our end of that wormhole with the intent of atomizing anything that sticks its head through. Maybe even both," he answered. "That sounds aggressive," Ariana replied. "It sounds perfectly reasonable to me," Ark interrupted. "All four of us know that there are things here that can't be allowed to go terrorizing people somewhere else." "Ark's right," Isla Fireblossom added. "The Gyrlings, the Corsarium, the Hodrakes, countless slaver and pirate cartels," Abraham continued. "And of course a door opens both ways. You probably have things that we would be better off not seeing here," the Ark cop added. Samantha smiled. "Numerous independent mad scientists, rogue warlords, hostile aliens, criminal syndicates, and not all of the Forerunners' old toys are benevolent. There's a malfunctioning robotic exploration fleet that just came back from exploring a nearby galaxy. You would not believe the trouble they've been giving us in some systems." "But what about the opportunities?" Ariana Quickspark countered. "For who?" Robert asked, starting to lose his patience with this conversation. "I mean, sure, our biologists would love to visit the spectrality and speak with their legendary Recombinator Guild, and our engineers will be everywhere getting their greasy little fingerprints all over everything if you let them. But at the same time, good exchanges are a two-way street, and I'm not sure our people will be willing to trade with some of you." Why? We treat each other pretty equally," Ariana replied, completely unaware that Ark was choking back a laugh in his seat behind her. Robert looked at Ariana squarely in the face, his eyes locking with hers. "You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means." He scowled before turning to make sure his blaster rifle was in order. Ariana looked like she wanted to continue this argument, but the other Cerberus explorers knew what Robert was thinking and were inclined to agree, or at least decided that abstaining was the best course of action based on how little they still knew about the galaxy they were trapped in. Fortunately, Ark, the surly mechanic, was happy to carry on and change the subject. "So," he began, "are there any bars or diners in this galaxy of yours?" That started a conversation that began with popular culinary traditions in both the Gliding Rim and the Milky Way galaxies. describing different types of food or alcohol, before ending with everyone sharing their favorite restaurant, as well as the city and planet it was on. As that topic started to wind down and the base of the elevator was still nowhere in sight, Samantha changed the topic again. So what's the strangest place in the gliding rim galaxy you've ever heard of? There was a pause for a moment, then Ark spoke again. I still get chills hearing the story of Kal Halazon, the Starship Graveyard. A Starship Graveyard? Sounds like a spacer's ghost story, Robert replied, eager for anything that kept the conversation away from hypothetical intergalactic diplomacy. That's what I tend to think too, but I've spoken to spacers operating on the fringe that swear the place is real. Thousands upon thousands of wrecked starships all mysteriously fused together into continuous rings around a strange star. Every ghost ship infested with some kind of zombie cyborg that's fused with the ship, Ark replied. Yeah, I've heard similar fairy tales in spaceport bars back home too. But those stories always turned out to be just that, stories. But then again, half the things we've seen here would have made for a good ghost story, Robert replied. The car finally arrived at its destination at the base of the space elevator and came down to a gradual stop before arriving at the base with a dull thunk. The group unfastened themselves and rose to their feet before walking towards the exit. Samantha donned her helmet and switched on its sensors while Robert checked to make sure his blaster rifle's power cell was fully charged. They were as ready as they'd ever be. Okay, I'm going to ask the Oracle a couple of questions. Are there any signs of a base camp at the base of the elevator? I give it a very likely, and 16 says yes. Are there any survivors of the Votikun cruiser anywhere? I give it a 50-50, and 81 says no, they're all dead. Are the VIPs still alive somewhere? I give it another 50-50, and 95 says they're dead as well. Is the Sunder Mage Nita and her forces somewhere on this planet? One last roll at 50-50 and 74. I'm going to interpret that as she escaped off the sphere somewhere. What did they wake up here? And after reconsidering it, I'm going to overrule the Oracle and say the VIPs are still alive. Outside in the expansive space elevator plaza, the 8 explorers found themselves walking into the abandoned remains of a Voti military camp. Prefabricated buildings, tents, crates of supplies, all set up in the middle of the transit plaza only to be abandoned. Everything looking like the Voti had just left and would return at any moment. Yet as the explorers walked towards the exit out of the elevator's cavernous plaza, several scorch marks dotted the walls and a handful of shell casings were scattered across the floor. Well, that's not good. What do you think they disturbed? Isla asked as she unsheathed her power sword and activated it, her shoulder-mounted Gatling cannon sweeping in front of her for targets. Robert looked over the scene where the fight took place and knew Samantha and Abraham were both doing the same. We'd see a lot more carnage if the entire base was here, he said reflectively. Indeed, maybe they had already encountered whatever is here, and this was just the last fight after the base had been picked off for a while, Abraham replied in agreement. So whoever did this worked relatively fast. They were only missing for 2 weeks, right? Are we sure your VIPs are even alive at this point? Samantha replied. Abraham was silent. He knew what she was implying and what they were all thinking. The question of what was more important, try and find survivors or focus on finding a way to escape the sphere in the Cerberus. The 8 fanned out and looked around to try and find any more clues as to who their opponents were, and find a way to quickly cover the distance between the plaza and the control center and back. Robert was not looking forward to the idea of walking 1,000 miles, even if it was inside of another glorified shopping mall. As they drifted towards the edge of the abandoned Voti base camp and into the arcology beyond, they made contact. No one was sure who spotted the being first, but once it was pointed out, they all saw it. A single Voti dressed in a naval officer's uniform stared blankly out into the main archaeology corridor, seemingly oblivious to the explorers behind him. "Hey, buddy, what happened here?" Robert shouted. Finally, the lone Voti began to turn slowly, too slowly for the Federation commandos' liking. And when he finally did, Robert immediately saw what nightmare they had stumbled upon and wished he didn't. The Voti officer was dead. Likely one of the cruiser's first casualties, judging by the way his body had started to stiffen up from rigor mortis. His skin had grown pale from the lack of circulation, and his eyes had rolled up towards the back of his head. But it was his mouth, permanently forced open, and what was inside it that made Robert's blood run cold. Sitting inside the stout humanoid's mouth was a white worm-like creature with the beady little black eyes looking right back at the explorers. At first, Robert thought the creature had somehow grafted itself over the dead Voti's tongue, but when it stood up inside the oral cavity to get a better look at them, he realized that no, the creature was the dead officer's tongue. "Excellent," the creature whispered with a perfect grasp of the common Grimmer language. "More hosts for the others. We were starting to fight over the ones we had left again." In reply, the four most heavily armed explorers silently opened fire and gunned down the creature with a hail of bullets and blaster bolts. As the stout corpse fell over with a thud, the Cerberus explorers looked at each other. Okay, I'm just going to say they killed a parasite zombie without any rolls or really consulting the Oracle. They're all in short range of each other. They have multiple lines of fire on the target. They got a free surprise attack, and weren't exactly given much room for diplomacy or polite conversation with a greeting like that. The next encounters will not be so easy, and there will be some rolling there. "Well, guess that answers one of the questions I had," Abraham replied nonchalantly, like he did not just witness a horrific parasite speak and control a corpse like an exoskeleton. "What? That we might be able to parlay with those things?" Samantha asked. "Nope. I was wondering if it would make more sense to split up and take my team to search for the missing VIPs while you went and opened the gateway back. But if we have at least 1,000 of those things wandering around, then that is a terrible idea," Abraham answered with a contemplative nod. "Yeah, no kidding. You know what happens in horror movies when they split up, right?" Robert replied. "Yes, they die." The Arc-Op smirked. "Good. Glad to see they don't give your job out to anyone that was dropped on their head as a child," Samantha smiled back before drawing her knife and carefully approaching the still smoldering corpse of the Voti naval officer. "I really should take a sample, although I really don't want to. After all, isn't this how all the bad horror movies start?" she replied as she watched the dead body for any sudden movements. "Just make sure it's actually dead and not playing dead before you get too close, Sam," Robert replied. "Okay. Is the parasite dead?" I give it a 50-50, and on a 38, the Oracle says, "Yes, it's very much dead." Sam gently poked the Voti body and the body of the tongue worm with the barrel of her blaster rifle. Yep, it was definitely dead. At least one shot had managed to hit the corpse squarely in the face, badly damaging the eyes and brain. But the rest of the body was still intact, she realized as she probed around in the dead Voti's mouth with her knife. Going to make a natural sciences check to see how well she collects the sample and if there's anything else she can learn from the corpse. 1d20 plus 3 for a 12 in total. Well, not the worst job she's done. She gets a sample but doesn't learn much from the corpse. After making a few careful cuts, Samantha pulled the parasite's charred remains and sealed it in a vacuum-sealed specimen container that was quickly stowed back on her equipment harness. "Can't really tell anymore without doing an autopsy first, but it looks like it goes further back than the tongue-eating louse seen on Earth. There's a tendril that blocks off the airway and looks like it curves upward into the brain. Nice! So they choke you out while they eat your tongue. Sounds like a real great bunch, Ark replied sarcastically. Look, was there anything on that map we got out of Sunder Mage's cabin about a transit station or something? Otherwise, we're walking to that control center. Is there a train station or anything like that on the Scream Queen's map? I give it a 50-50. And 3 on the percentile die says yes. The 2 Commonwealth explorers, the ones most familiar with the language of the Forerunners, nodded. Yes, it says there's a monorail station that runs right to the control center outside. Blossom answered gently, still pale beneath her black and white fur as she looked over the corpse that Samantha had been analyzing, gesturing to a massive sign that directed the 8 adventurers outside the vast space elevator lobby and down a corridor to the right. Well, at least that's one problem solved, Isla Fireblossom interjected. So should we all go, or should one group stay behind to make sure those things don't try to cut us off while we're all out here? Weren't we just discussing why splitting up might not be a good idea? Jerry Riggs asked. No, that's actually a good counterpoint, but we need to stop arguing and all get going. They're going to notice their friend is missing before too long, assuming they didn't already hear us gun him down. We just have to deal with that problem when we're done, Robert replied as he started to walk towards the exit leading out into the sprawling urban complex. His rifle held at rest against his chest as he kept an eye out for more zombie parasites. Are there any louse puppeteers that heard the blaster fire? I give it a 50-50. And 32 says yes. Yeah, the explorers better get moving. The others quickly followed after him as Robert stepped out of the space elevator plaza and into the sprawling, self-contained mega city. The area outside continued the shopping mall feel that Robert had been getting the moment he arrived. Corridors and storefronts for everything from offices to restaurants were present as far as the eye could see, all perfectly maintained and preserved by whatever automated repair system the Forerunners still had working. And all of it so perfectly empty and silent that they could easily hear the sound of a large crowd of zombified Voti slowly stomping their way back towards them, their heavily armored boots stomping on the polished stone mosaic floors with a thud that echoed through the largely empty complex. They were coming. A lot of them were coming. And thus the explorers need to leave unless they wanted to fight off multiple zombified Voti Marines with their full combat gear. Following the signage, they soon arrived at a monorail station that sat on a raised platform above the pedestrian traffic. The otherwise relaxing colors of the Forerunners stood in sharp contrast to the horror they just witnessed. A monorail train currently idled on the station, completely empty, just waiting for passengers. Robert still couldn't believe they would be so lucky. The footsteps of the parasites hadn't followed after them, but still, would it be beyond lucky if this machine was still working perfectly? Okay. Is the monorail damaged or in need of repair? I give it a somewhat likely, so 60 or less. 54. As they all gathered on the station platform, Robert noticed the monorail was inert. Blossom stepped forward and looked inside. Looks like the power conduits need to be replaced. Let me see if I can fix it. Blossom makes a mechanics check to repair the inner workings of the train to get it working again. 1d20 plus 7 and 19 on the roll. Yes, she manages to fix it, no problem. Blossom raised her constructor gauntlets and activated the nanite hives in her gauntlets with a blue half-light as she began to fix the inner workings and quickly coaxed the train back to life. Boarding the tram, Jerry Riggs activated a computer terminal and gently got the tram moving. Soon they were moving along at a good clip as the tram cars glided along an electromagnetic railway. The mall outside began to pass by the explorers in a blur of empty spaces with functions that none of them could even begin to guess at. Stores, offices, apartments, surreal interior art projects. No one was entirely sure as they continued to zip on by. Most of the light seemed artificial, coming from electric lamps that lined the walls and ceilings rather than skylights. It made Robert wonder what the point of all this enclosed urban space was. Robert estimated that at the rate they were going, it would take them about 4 hours till they arrived at the control center. Not as fast as a human trooper would have liked, especially how they arrived, but he had to admit that it beat walking so far. It definitely helped underline just how vast this place was, something everyone was having trouble wrapping their heads around. What could these forerunners need all this space for? Ariana Quickspark wondered aloud as she did some quick maintenance on her robotic assistant, Jeeves. The Orion Commonwealth was created by them, and even we question their reasoning from time to time. This is definitely one of those times. We could fit our entire society here and still have room left over for the Sol Federation to come settle if they wish, Jerry replied. Nah, we wouldn't get along with the neighbors if the louse puppeteers we just encountered are anything to go by, Samantha replied with a laugh. Louse puppeteers? Detective Abrams asked. Well, they look like the louses we have on our homeworld, and they use dead bodies like puppets, Samantha replied with a shrug. Do they encounter any complications on the trip? I give it a 50-50, and 65 says no. The trip passes relatively peacefully for the gliding rim galaxy, which in itself is rare and terrifying. Though they half expected it, nothing lashed out at the explorers while they were in transit. No large monsters attacked the train, no louse puppeteers or other horrors forced them to stop at a tram station to ambush them, and there were surprisingly no mechanical failures forcing the tram to come to a stop or throw them off the track. Those 4 hours passed slowly as the group struggled to relax or come up with ways to pass the time. Samantha tried to learn a little bit more about Voti society and physiology from Ayla Fireblossom in order to quietly settle a bet between Robert and herself. While the Voti looked more like short humans with teddy bear sort of proportions than the dwarves from Human Fantasy, the way their warships were decorated still made the comparison a reasonable one. But where else were there similarities? Ignoring the whole existential questions revolving around stumbling upon an entire humanoid species mirroring a classic fantasy trope. Well, Ayla was not a doctor or a biologist. She was willing to answer Samantha's questions the best she could. The most curious detail the four Cerberus explorers managed to get out of the conversation between the two battle-hardened females was that the Voti had a particularly curious case of neurodivergent brains. Robert didn't have enough medical knowledge to completely follow the conversation, but managed to piece together the important notes. Voti had the ability to mentally subdivide their minds, each subdivision given a specific task to focus on. Among other things, this particular mental discipline made them good at operating cybernetic equipment that would normally require a great amount of mental focus from other species. Ah, so that's the thing with your gun, Robert replied with an understanding nod, gesturing to the cybernetic anti-personnel ordnance cannon that was perched on her shoulder. I was wondering if it was controlled by some sort of autonomous AI or if there was some sort of mental trick you were doing to control it, he added, remembering the satisfying roar it made when they all opened fire on that puppeteer. Is your APO projectile only, or do the Voti Marines have energy weapon variants? Samantha asked. And do you have any domestic applications of that technology? I thought you were going to leave trade negotiations to diplomats, Ariana interrupted, the green-skinned roboticist regarding the two humans with a jealous glare. Negotiate a trade? Hell no! We're trying to see how many action figures the Voti can model for, Robert countered with a laugh, getting a similar reaction out of the others. Ayla smiled. Well, if we made an APO energy weapon, no one's told me about it. I definitely want to be on the short list for one of those if we start making them. She laughed before her face fell. As for other applications, I was under the impression that's why these two VIPs were meeting. We had been making some progress with robotic servo limbs and were negotiating with the Vazarians for some of their robotic expertise. Pretty sure this kidnapping set that project back, which might have been what the Thunder Mages wanted all along. Robert wasn't sure what else to say other than the obvious. They might still be alive. I don't like their odds, but I've seen people beat worse odds before. Either way, that just makes it all the more important for us to open the gateway back up and get some kind of help, because we are not going to be able to find them in all of this by ourselves. He gestured to the enclosed environment outside for emphasis. As if in response to the human soldier's gesture, the tram began to slow down as it finally reached its destination. Looks like it was time to see what new horrors awaited them here. That, Robert quickly realized, was perhaps the real horror of this Dyson sphere. Encyclopedia's worth of different horrific monsters kept apart from each other by distance and a transit network that was probably inactive until the explorers started messing with it. Alright, anyone want to start off by placing bets on what we might face? Isla began as the train came to a stop and everyone rose to get off. What? She asked as the four Cerberus explorers looked at her. My squad mates and I did this all the time back in the Xeno Encounter Recon Unit. Insect Super Predator, 200 credits. A different tribe of puppeteers, 50 credits. 100 credits if they hate the first tribe for some reason, and we can find a way to take advantage of that, Samantha replied, shooting a glare right back at Ayla and making it clear what she thought of this game. Oh, for the love of... Lost tribe of Orions or some other Forerunner living toys. Suspicious of us at first, but ultimately friendly. 100 credits, Robert bet with a smile. Everyone else either backed away or otherwise abstained, while Ayla shook her head. You two aren't very good at this game, are you? Can't spend your money if you're dead, and a man that looks for trouble will always find it in ample supply, Robert retorted as the group got off and stepped out into the tram station. The tram station looked exactly like the one by the space elevator, an adorned raised platform above the main pedestrian corridor. Descending the stairs and fanning out into the hallway below, the explorers checked their map. Checking their location against the map, they set off again in the direction of the control center and started the last leg of their trip on foot. Walking along through the long thoroughfare, smaller side corridors leading off deeper into other parts of the enclosed Ecomopolis, the group kept together as they watched for trouble. One more turn and they were almost there. Is there something aware of them? I give it a 50-50 and 42 says yes. Is there something waiting for them at the gate control center? I think it's somewhat likely, given that they're aware of the explorers, and 61. No. More than once, the explorers thought they saw something at the edge of their vision, only to turn and see it disappear. Faint slithering noises echoed through the distant hallways. Yet when they arrived at the gateway, the open atrium leading up to the complex was completely empty. Nothing threatened or ambushed them. This did nothing for the paranoia of the more martial members of the team. Something was clearly following them, and right outside of their goal would have been a great place to catch them out in the open. Outside of a handful of park benches and knee-high planters full of overgrown weeds, there wasn't much the group could take cover behind, and even less that would hold up in a prolonged firefight. And yet nothing stopped them from walking up to the security gate, still looking clean and well-maintained, and still crackling from the electricity running through the metal gates keeping them out. Still hardly the biggest hurdle they've come across, and they've already come so far. Is there a control panel outside of the gate? I say it's about 50-50. Something might be necessary for emergency maintenance. 74% says no. Is there another way to the guard station that's likely has big windows looking into a secure area so the guards can watch? I give it a very likely, and 63 says yes. Is this way dangerous? Again, 50-50, and 39 says yes as well. The group checked outside the gates for an access panel, a terminal they could use to override. Nothing. However, the security glass window had a large hole cracked in it by a circular projectile that had long since vanished. It was just large enough that one of their smaller members could fit. Seeing what had to happen next, Jerry checked his gloves and his boots. Okay, let me see if there isn't a way in that doesn't cut me open first. He replied and began to search the wall for any signs of a ventilation grate that he could pop open and crawl into. Is there a vent that the group hadn't spotted yet? 50-50, since I honestly have no idea. 38, yes there is. Running his slender fingers across the smooth polymer wall, Jerry found the lip of a small ventilation grate that was artistically designed to blend in with the rest of the wall to help discourage people from doing exactly what he was going to do right now. Pulling out a small multi-tool, a token of a youth spent hopping between spaceships, he quickly popped open the vent grate and pushed it aside before crawling in. A moment later, the others spotted him inside the guard shack, blaster pistol nervously drawn as he expected something to be hiding in there for him. The Orion mouse quickly walked over to the control panel and started coaxing it to life. Does Jerry successfully hack the gate controls? It shouldn't be particularly hard and use a programming language he already knows. He gets a 10 on a 1d20 plus 4. Yeah, I say that he does, but he trips something as a complication. Staring at the login screen, asking for a password for a moment, Jerry Riggs decided to do a trick he remembered from his stowaway days and reset the terminal back to its factory defaults. Typing in a few half-remembered command prompts, he opened the gates and the back door to the sentry post. Yet there was one last command line that caught his eye. Sentry units activated. Default program initialized. Well, that's not good, Riggs observed meekly. What's not good? Abraham asked as the other explorers walked through the open gates and reunited with him inside the security station. The ARC cop looked down at the terminal and blinked as he couldn't read the Forerunner script. What is that? The ever-tall Blossom looked over Abraham and Jerry as she read the terminal, frowning. Looks like there is a robotic security system, and that it's been activated. Great! That sounds like fun, Samantha commented sarcastically as they all began to walk deeper into the facility and started looking for the control center. So if we find this thing, what do we do? Jerry asked as they walked through the abandoned atrium. Turn it off, obviously, Blossom replied, taking her Orion cohort's question a little too literally. But what stops them from turning it back on while we travel back? It took us almost a day to get here, Jerry countered, pointing out the obvious flaw with their current plan. We'll figure out something once we get up there and turn it off, Robert interjected. Activating an old Forerunner holographic directory, the group made their way towards the complex control center. Are there any complications keeping them from getting to the control center? I give it a 50-50. And the Oracle says 92. No, there isn't anything stopping them. Okay, guess the robotic guards are not patrolling this part of the complex yet. One long hallway and a short elevator ride later, the explorers arrived in the control center. Compared to the size of the ship's gateway and the complex it managed, the control room was surprisingly small. The builders had made efficient use of the space. Sleek control terminals were built into walls or combined when possible to make the most of the room for the control chairs. The control chairs were definitely a Forerunner design, well cushioned with plush memory foam polymers, 4 sturdy legs ending in spear-shaped wheels made of frictionless metal. This design got a few snickers from the Grimmers. Fond of sitting, weren't they? Murphy chirped sarcastically. Well, it would be a pain if you had to stand in front of these terminals for a full shift every day, Robert replied with a shrug as Blossom and Jerry sat down at the controls. Jerry looked like a child for how small he was compared to the Forerunners, while even Blossom did not completely fill up the control chair. Both of them started to work on the computer systems. Blossom attempts a computer check to deactivate barriers holding the Cerberus inside the sphere. She is rolling a 1d20 plus 7. She gets a 9. Jerry is also working 1d20 plus 4 and 7. Well, they get it open, but again, there will be consequences. Blossom shook her head and exhaled nervously. We got it open, but it uses a coding language we haven't seen before. This might be the first Forerunner facility that uses this code. We got it open, but I'm not sure what else we opened. Then we better get out of here, and if we do run into the missing ambassadors on the way back to our ship, all the better, Detective Shields replied. Not without making sure the louses don't close it up again after we leave. How do we sabotage the controls so they can't just close the door until we're back on our own ship? Robert asked. Blossom thought about it and activated her constructor gauntlet, using the nanite swarms and electromagnetic emitters within to sabotage the control systems. Going to try rolling, even though it's not my night. 1d20 plus 7 against again, and 20 total. Blossom deactivated her gauntlet after the control screens flickered and went dead. I eroded the control inputs and the video outputs. They will need to be replaced before these computers can be used again, she replied sheepishly. Deliberately breaking things, especially in a hard-to-detect way, was not the typical solution for most adult Orions. The others nodded, and the group left back the way they came. At first, everything seemed to be going well, but as they navigated the corridors out to the main atrium, the skittering of mechanical limbs could be heard, echoing throughout the building. Almost out of the building, they turned to the corridor and found themselves facing a large troop of spider-like robots, bristling with weapons, humming with power. Okay, rolled a D8 for how many security robots are waiting for them. Got a 7, which sounds about right for 4 PCs and 4 characters currently NPCs. We're going to use drone robot security for the security robots. For Shields and Fire Blossom, I'm going to use the Royal Warden Guardian NPC stat block. For Arc and Quick Spark, I'm going to use a Technician stat block. All of these are from the Intergalactic Heroes beta rules. Let's roll initiative. The security bots get a 12. Arc and Quick Spark get a 20. Shields and Fire Blossom get a 22. Samantha also gets a 22, but goes after Shields and Fire Blossom due to lower dex. Jerry gets a 20 on his initiative and goes ahead of the NPC techs due to a higher dex. Blossom gets a 14. And Robert Manus gets a 5. Wow, my dice really are cursed with him. So the order is Abraham Shields, Ayla Fire Blossom, Samantha, Jerry, Arc Quick Spark, Blossom, Security Robots, then Robert. Okay, maybe this is not as bad as I thought it was. Shields immediately drew Murphy and fired at the closest robot towards him. Rolls a 1d20 plus 5 to hit. 16 beats the robot's defense. He does 14 damage. His target has 5 HP left. A deafening roar erupted from the Arcop's piece as a plasma bolt tore through the security robot's chassis and caused a huge chunk of it to explode in a shower of sparks and small shrapnel. Ayla's cybernetic APO began to whirl, seemingly with a life of its own, as she drew and ignited her power sword. The shoulder-mounted cannon fired a short burst of fire at a different robot as she moved to strike Shield's opponent with her sword. Ayla rolls a 1d20 plus 5 to hit. 19 definitely beats the robot's 14 defense. She does 14 damage against her target as well. The second robot has 5 HP left. The short 3-round burst connecting squarely with the second robot, wrecking its optical sensors and shearing off one of its many legs as its chassis began to spark and smoke from damaged electronics. Seeing that their luck had run out and all of their attackers were still active, Samantha raised her blaster rifle and followed up on Ayla's attack with one of her own. She rolls a 1d20 plus 4 to hits and gets a 16, also beating her target's defense. Damage is a 1d12 plus 2, and that gives me an 8. That second robot is scrap. The plasma bolt from her blaster rifle connected with the target, slagging the chassis plating and causing the security robot to collapse in an inert heap. Blaster pistol in hand, Jerry ducks behind the cover of a weed-choked planter and fires at another robot. Jerry attacks with a 1d20 plus 5 and gets an unnatural 20. He scores a glancing blow against his target for 3 damage. It still has 16 HP left. Striking true, the ox jock unfortunately hit a non-vital part, and the robot shrugged off the damage before turning towards the Orion ox jock. Taking a step backwards, Quick Spark motioned for Jeeves to take care of Jerry's opponent. The robot obliged and turned its right forearm into some kind of energy weapon before firing. Okay. Ariana Jeeves, we're just going to say her robotic butler is her personal gadget, attacks the third robot with a 1d20 plus 5. Another unnatural 20, which hits. 2d10 plus 3 is 9 damage. The security droid has 7 HP left. Jeeves connects directly with the third robot and severs a few limbs, but the security robot is still standing. Shaking his head and pulling a large power drill-shaped device out of his tool belt, Ark fired a beam of electric energy at this third robot. Ark is also attacking with his personal gadget. 1d20 plus 5 for 9. The first miss of the combat session. Unfortunately, the robot ended leaning heavily to one side from Ariana's attack, throwing Ark's aim off and making the blast collide harmlessly with the wall behind it. Seeing the group was in danger, Blossom rose her constructor gauntlet up and fired a blast of electromagnetic energy against the robot Ayla was about to grapple with. Blossom rolls a 1d20 plus 4, 21 total hits. Rolling a 1d6 plus 2 for damage and gets a 6. That robot is scrap. Electricity arced from her gauntlet and caused the robot to collapse to the floor with a small puff of smoke. "Hey! That one was mine!" Isla Fire Blossom shouted on reflex. The Voti was annoyed to have her kills stolen like that. "Oh, give it a rest, Fire Blossom. Still plenty of live ones left," Ark replied automatically. The two had clearly been doing this for a while. Okay, 2 down, 5 left to go, and the robots are only taking their first turn now. Not too bad, all things considered. They're going to spread out their attacks since everyone on the PC side has been equally dangerous so far. One attacks Abram, hits with a 23, and does 7 damage with a blaster pistol. The Ark Cop has 61 HP left. Another attacks Fire Blossom. 9 does not beat her 16 defense, so she's safe. Another attacks Samantha. 15 to hit, just narrowly hits her armor. She takes 6 damage. Has 39 HP left. Another attacks Ark, despite him not hitting anything. 19 on an attack, beats his defense. He takes 7 damage and has 29 HP left. The last one takes a shot at Ariana. 15 to hit. The attack does hit, and she takes 10 damage, knocking her down to 26. Not to be outdone, the security robots fired back with small plasma blasters, striking several of the explorers and sending jolts of pain and heat where the shots connected. Robert took this all in at a glance, raised his blaster rifle, and fired a blast at the robot that Jerry had singed. Robert's rolling a 1d20 plus 4 and gets a 23. That hits. He does 14 damage on a 1d12 plus 2. Another one is down. Robert shot Robert's shot struck true and destroyed the security robot's power supply, causing it to collapse in a shower of sparks and go dead almost immediately. He then tried to take cover behind another overgrown planter in the base building's atrium. Top it around again, starting with Abraham. He lines up another target and fires. He scores a 10 on a 1d20 plus 5. He does not hit. Plasma energy dissipated by his armored duster. He still grimaced under the intense heat of the energy blast hitting his shoulder. Unfortunately, it was still enough to throw off Shield's aim, and his own attack impacted harmlessly with a nearby wall. Eager to hit something with her sword and undeterred by a plasma bolt sailing above her head, Isla charged the robot Abraham was trying to hit and struck it with her sword twice. Ayla rolls a 19 on her first hit with her power sword and 13 on her second hit. The first one hits, but the second one doesn't. The first attack does 8 points of damage. The robot has 11 HP left. Ayla's first attack connected and severed a pair of legs off the robot's left side, while her second hit bounced harmlessly off the chassis plating. Smarting from where the robot hit her armor, Samantha took aim at the robot Ayla was in melee with and opened fire. Samantha gets an 8 on her attack and misses. Unfortunately, the pain of the attack threw off her aim and hit the robot at an angle it deflected effortlessly. Desperate to avoid getting hit again, she moved in to get behind cover with Jerry. Seeing his friends get hurt and were still struggling, pushed something inside of Jerry, forcing him to take another shot at Ayla's robot. Jerry rolls a 16. That hits. He does 3 damage. The robot has 8 HP left. Angry, he struck true, but only succeeded in landing another glancing blow for superficial damage. Ariana writhed in agony as her skin began to blister from the intense heat of the plasma burst. She gestured to Jeeves to try and finish the one Ayla had started. Ariana attacks with her personal gadget Jeeves. Jeeves attacks with a 10, missing. Jeeves fires his arm cannon again, but misses. Seeing that the fight wasn't quite going their way, Ariana ran towards the exit and the tram station beyond. The intense heat of plasma, a familiar pain, Ark fired his plasma tool again. Ark attacks with a 24, that hits. He does 8 damage. That robot is scrap. His attack hits Ayla's robot in the core CPU, bricking it into another heap of scrap metal. He starts to take off after Ariana and Jeeves, taking care to duck and keep his head down. "Oh, come on, guys," Ayla Fireblossom shouted jokingly. "Can I have at least one?" "Maybe when they're not beating Proby like a microwave," Murphy chirped back audibly. Blossom ignored this exchange as he tried to quickly think. Friends were getting hurt and there were still 3 robots left. She looked up and saw a power capacitor in the wall just behind the remaining robots. 3 robots left. Rolling a 1d6 divided by 2 to see how many Blossom can hit with a good overload. She can potentially take 2 off the board. She spends a genius point to use overload. She does 15 points of damage to 2 of them if they don't make their dex saves. 10 does not beat 13, so those 2 robots have 4 HP left. She fired another bolt of electrical energy from her constructor gauntlet, hitting the capacitor and overloading it, causing it to explode and heavily damage the 2 closest robots before they could move out of the way. She then tried to run after the fleeing Grimmer techies, ducking behind a column closer to the door. Seeing that the Blossom was the most dangerous threat and unable to get a direct line of sight on her, the robots took up defensive footing, firing at Ayla and Robert as the 2 of them were still out in the open and were the second 2 most dangerous fighters out in the field. 3 robots left. 2 attack Ayla. 11, 18. Only the 18 hits. The second robot does 7 points of damage against Ayla. She has 61 HP left. One robot attacks Robert. 10 misses his defense of 16. Ducking as a plasma bolt sailed over his blonde crew-cut hair, Robert fired back at the explosion-charred robot that tried to take a shot at him. Robert rolls attacks and gets a 19 that hits. He does 4 points of damage. That's one of the robots blossom scorched, so it's dead. As the robot fell over destroyed, Robert moved towards the half of the group running towards the exit. Grumbling at his missed shot, Abraham fired once more into the undamaged robot. Okay, Shields gets a 15 on his attack. That hits. He does 12 damage. The robot has 7 HP left. His attack strikes true and hits the robot squarely in the chassis, staggering it as his attack connects with the servo motor. Seeing that someone might be stealing her kill again, Ayla quickly swung her power sword at her opponent. Ayla attacks with a 1d20 plus 5 in melee twice, getting an 8 and a 21. The second attack hits for 7 damage. The robot parried away her first swing but was decapitated by her power sword when she connected with a second strike. Full of anger, Jerry rose up and fired his blaster pistol one more time in the remaining badly damaged robot. And I'm just going to give it to him. He has 4 HP left. His shot connected squarely with the robot's torso and made it collapse in wisps of smoke and the stench of burnt circuitry. "About time you stopped picking on my friends," he squeaked angrily. Roughed up but victorious, the others laughed and the group walked out of the control complex with a more relaxed stride as they retraced their steps back to the tram station with a stench of burnt ozone in their clothes. Do they encounter anything on their way back? I give it a 50-50 and 71. The Oracle says no. The hike back to the tram station was mercifully uneventful. Nothing ambushed or attacked them on the way over. With a bit more stiffness, they walked back up the stairs to the tram and got aboard. A moment later, the tram came back to life and took them back towards the space elevator. Everyone used the 4-hour-long trip back to catch their breath, reload weapons, patch up whatever injuries they had, and steeled themselves as they prepared for whatever awaited them. "I guess none of us won that bet," Samantha began with a laugh and a wince as the plasma burn still stung her skin. The others laughed back, but before the tram cabin grew quiet again. Everyone was waiting for their arrival at the station. Are the louse puppeteers waiting for them back at the space elevator? I give it a somewhat likely, and 85 says no. Okay. Guess something else has occupied their attention. Is there something else waiting for the explorers at the space elevator lobby? I give it a 50-50, and 7 says yes. Is this person hostile? Again, 50-50, and 89 says no. A few hours later, they arrived at the space elevator tram station and disembarked. The mall-like collection of offices, shops, and residences were eerily quiet. There wasn't a sound the explorers could hear beyond their own footsteps and breathing. Bright warm lights overhead simulated daylight and made it impossible to sneak up on anything. Not even the ragged-looking individuals they almost shot as the explorers turned and entered the abandoned Votikun base camp. "Wait! Please help us!" One of the figures called out loudly in Grimmer, too loudly for Robert's comfort. The group lowered their weapons as they saw who had gotten into the lobby ahead of them. 2 male figures, Voti and Fazarian, both dressed in upper-class clothing that looked like it had been worn for the past several days. "These the VIP diplomats you dragged the rest of us out here to find?" Robert asked Abraham. "They are," the Arcop replied before turning back to their guests. Forge Master Firestriker and Mr. Avon of Avon Robotics, I presume? Yes, are you the rescue team? The Votikun Master asked, relief on the stout humanoid's face. No, we're the rescue team for the rescue team, Robert interjected, which is why we all need to get out of here. We can talk about how you escaped later, he explained as suddenly the heavy stomp of armored boots began to echo through the corridors outside the lobby. Not another word was said as the explorers helped the two missing dignitaries up and hurried into the space elevator. The first louse puppeteers had just come around the bend as the group was strapping in, and the elevator began to close. A vanguard of zombie Voti Marines, at least a dozen strong, looked at the closing elevator car with unseeing eyes and mouths open wide. Tongues that were not tongues quivered and raged as the elevator car began to rapidly ascend to the terminus station where the Cerberus was docked. Several hours later, the explorers and their guests were taken back aboard the Cerberus, and the ship quickly cast off. Her crew was at their normal positions, breaths held as they came around and headed towards the still open gateway at full speed. The atmosphere was tense as they flew through, expecting the gateway to start closing while they were still inside, but it never happened. Next thing they knew, they were out and on their way to the nearest friendly planet. Sometime later. Safely at a friendly orbital port in the Votikun Empire, the crew of the Cerberus repaired and resupplied their ship. The dignitaries had been returned safely, the agreement was finalized, and the two powers had begun to collaborate on their research project. The Cerberus's debt with the Truthseekers had been settled, and the crew was planning on trying to just outrun the Sunder Mage's blockade around the wormhole. They could have returned to the Forerunner sphere. There might be a device that would allow them to teleport back to their home galaxy without running the risk of getting destroyed by the Sunder Mages. But even if there was, finding it in a space that vast with just the four of them would have been an impossible task. More than likely they would only find their death, either at the hands of the louse puppeteers or something worse. So they quietly decided to just risk it. Say their goodbyes to the friends they made without being specific about where they were going. They took off. Several jumps later, they found themselves at the edge of the Arcanumbra wormhole. Hundreds of Sundermage ships from nimble fighters all the way to massive dreadnoughts still orbited around the vast purple wormhole. The Cerberus quietly maintained its trajectory into the wormhole. As tense seconds blurred into eternity, the Cerberus drifted closer to the wormhole as its hyperdrive charged up. Enemy ships were all around them, all of them carrying on like no one noticed them. Then suddenly one fell out of orbit and went on an intercept course with the exploration ship. Then a second ship, and a third, as the Sunder Mages formed a ring around their vessel, drawing closer like a tightening noose. The Cerberus engaged her hyperdrive. There was a bright flash of purple light as the crew braced for anything. The lurch of jumping into hyperspace, the sudden explosion of decompression, anything. Then suddenly the light faded and the Cerberus' crew found themselves looking at familiar constellations as the bridge began receiving a message from another ship in the system. Cerberus? Attention Cerberus, this is the Sol Federation cruiser Liberty Bell. Is anyone available? Please respond. Robert smiled. It shouldn't have worked, but so far it looked like it did. Liberty Bell, this is Sergeant Robert Manus, commander of the Cerberus expeditionary vessel, and you have no idea how happy we are to hear your voice. We have a long report for Federation Command in the Commonwealth. And that is the end of this campaign. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed.